Hi guys, welcome back to a Spring Security tutorial once again. So in the last video, we talked about the prerequisite that we required in order to follow along this course. And then we talk about uh, few of the things about security and the Spring Security itself. Okay. So in the earlier video, we just scratch a surface. We need to dive deep into the Spring Security framework and learn and apply into the our production ready applications. Okay. So yeah. So first thing first. So what is the today's agenda? So the today agenda is to creating our first Spring Security project. Okay. The second thing is uh, uh, what to expect by default from Spring Security, and then the Spring Security architecture, and then we're gonna customize some of the defaults. So let's start with our first agenda, that is creating our first Spring Security object. To do that, you need to go to the Spring Initializer. There, this is one of the way to create a Spring Boot project. Okay, so basically, I'm going to use the Maven build tool and the language as Java, and I'm going to use a stable version of Spring Boot, which is 3.5.6 as of now. Now, these are the small metadata that we need to fill for our project. So for the first one is the group. Group is nothing but defines who is the owner of this project. So I'm just gonna put in that way. And then the artifact. Artifact will be the project name, that which name you want to give to this project. So I'm just gonna give Spring Security intro. Okay. Description if you want to give. So we will use later. And then this is the package name that it defined by default, which is the group plus artifact. So you can change this also. Okay. So now, yeah. So the packaging, I'm going to use the jar, and the Java version, I'm going to use 21. Now, this is the main part, dependencies. So which all Spring functionalities that we need in order to go with this tutorial. So first thing that we required is the web dependency. Okay, to create the web APIs. This is for that purpose, and then we're gonna have the security, Spring Security. Okay. So first one is for developing the REST APIs, and the second is one for the securing those APIs. Okay. So that's it. When we're gonna click on generate, it will be downloaded. Okay. Now, when we go there, we're just gonna extract it. So now we need to import our project in the IDE. You can use any IDE of your choice. Okay. So I'm going to select existing Maven project. Then this one. So if you see, detect the pom.xml file by default. Okay. So I'm just gonna hit the finish. So it will take some time to download all the dependencies, all the jars. So our project is downloaded. So we're gonna just run it once and check if everything is fine. So this is the main entry Java class. We just gonna run it. So see, our application is started. Okay, our application is up and running. It is running on the port 8080. So if you see, there is couple of things. So first thing is, we didn't do anything, and one object is automatically configured by Spring. That is user detail service auto configuration. So in Spring Security, there is one concept of auto configuration, which will help us in automatically configuring the beans. Okay. So if you see here, there is one password is generated. Okay. And it is also saying one message that this is for only development purpose. Do not use it into the production. Okay. Because every time you're gonna run this application, it's going to be a change. So if you see, we didn't do any changes. We just added a Spring security in the pom.xml file, and some of the things is automatically configured, and some of the thing is automatically generated for us. So that is the beauty of the Spring applications. Okay, majorly the Spring Boot, in which we talk about the convention or configuration. Okay, so instead of writing all the boilerplate codes, Spring Boot help us to quickly up and run the application. So now our application is protected by Spring security. How we gonna test it? So for testing it, we need to we're going to have one API. So what we're gonna do? We're gonna create one API. So we're gonna follow the three-layer structure. That is the controller layer, service layer, and the DAO layer, or the repo layer, whatever you can say. Okay, we're gonna create a one package called controller, inside of which I'm gonna create one class, which is the this one, hello controller, and I'm gonna annotate with this controller. And then I'm gonna create over get API, which gonna be /hello, and then I'm gonna be returning one message. So now we're gonna have we are having one API which is exposed via one endpoint call /hello, and it's gonna return us some message, greeting message, that is hello there. Okay, so all the annotation that I use here, that comes into this Spring Boot. This is that is some that is completely itself is a big topic, the Spring Boot itself. So if you want to learn the Spring Boot, go watch some tutorial on YouTube, or go via some book if you like the book. And in some times I will also upload the Spring Boot course itself. Okay, so now we have the endpoint. Now if it's what we're gonna do, we're gonna go and check if we are able to access this API or not. So what I'm gonna do, run it. So let it run. Okay, so it is started. Yeah. So what I'm gonna do? So what I did, I just created one API, and so yeah, so I just created one API, and I'm trying to access this API using a Postman. This is one of the tool that we can use to test our API. Okay, we can use it to hit our API. So here since I'm running in locally, I use this HTTP protocol. Then localhost is the my machine itself, and the port is the where my Spring Boot application is up and running. Okay, and this is the endpoint, that particular endpoint I want to hit. So we created one endpoint with /hello. So I'm trying to access that. So when I hit it, what I got, I didn't got a greeting message. Instead, I got 401, which is unauthorized. What this means? So basically, so what is HTTP status? This is nothing but response that is given by server to client. Basically status. So HTTP is one of the protocol. HTTPS is one of the protocol. So in those protocol, we have some status code that has some certain meaning. So in this case, if you see in this case, example 4401, which basically means unauthorized, which basically means server didn't recognize the caller or client. Okay, so say the same way we have this 403, which is server recognize the caller or client, but they didn't have authority. They didn't have authority to perform requested action. Okay, so we will talk about this later in more detail. So basically, 401 is the status code when we get some error on the authentication layer, and 403 is something when we have error from authorization layer. Okay, so we will talk about this in more detail later. Okay, so now I'm not able to call our API. So that's what I explained. When you plug in the Spring security, by default, one layer, one basic security mechanism is already in place. to protect our application. That is production ready? No, that is not production ready. That is there only for to give you a taste or hint about what Spring Security can do. Okay, so how to access our this one the API? What we're gonna do? There are a couple of mechanisms in the Spring Security architecture. So one of the mechanism is the HTTP basic. So by default, Spring Security use the basic authorization. Default username is the user, and what is the default password that is printed into the console itself. Now, if we try to hit it, boom, we got our response. So there is already one protective mechanism by default attached to our application the moment we plug in the Spring Security. Okay. So now let's move to the our next agenda of today's video. That is Spring Security architecture. So this is the most important thing, the Spring Security architecture. Okay. So let's discuss this. So, okay. So now let's say this is the request that comes in. The request comes in. Okay. And this is our application. In middle, we have lots of things, but for the sake of simplicity, I'm just assuming that this request coming directly to our application on some port, let's say on port 8080 with /help. Okay. So now there is two things. Okay. So first thing is the authentication. Okay. I hope you are able to see. Okay. So the first thing is our authentication. Okay. Authentication filter we have. So request now comes to authentication filter. Okay. What these all classes will do, I will explain in a bit a moment. Okay. So first thing, let me draw the architecture itself. Then it comes to authentication manager. Okay. Now it goes to authentication provider. Okay. Now this uses two things. So user detail service and PasswordEncoder. Okay. So how the request will flow from authentication filter, it goes to authentication manager. From authentication manager, it goes to authentication provider. From authentication provider, it goes to either user detail service or password in. Sorry, both of no, both are. It uses both the classes, and then once everything is fine, it moves. It gives the response back to the authentication manager, and authentication manager gives back the response to authentication filter. Okay. And now this authentication filter does one thing, security context, and also it sends back the response. So yeah, so this is the overall architecture. This is the authentication in Spring Security Framework. One is the authentication, and another one is the authorization. So we're not gonna focus on authorization, but yeah, this is there. We have to keep in mind this is there, and this security context is used by authorization layer. Okay, so let me explain what these all classes means. Okay, so first thing is authentication filter. What authentication filter do? It just delegates the authentication request that is coming here to the authentication manager. Okay. And based on the response, it configure the security context. So based on the response means if authentication is successful, if a user who requested a resource in our application is properly authenticated, then its information is going to be stored in security context. So security context is nothing but it stores the what it do stores the authenticated request info. So basically all the it stores the user object itself and then bunch of other stuff that we will discuss later when we come to security context. Okay. So now authentication manager. So now this authentication manager uses this authentication provider to authenticate the request. Okay. So now this when this authentication provider receives a request, it uses two other two other components in the Spring Security framework, that is user detail service and password encoder. What is user detail service? So user detail service responsibility is to get the user, okay, is to get the details of the user, and the password encoder responsibility is to match the requested password with the user saved password. Okay, so I just pass my username, I just pass the password. So based on the username, this user detail service will fetch my all the information that is stored at our DB, and this password, the requested password, and the password which is stored in our DB, both of them are matching or not, that is the responsibility of this password encoder. Okay, so its responsibility is to match the requested password with stored. Yeah. Okay. Its responsibility is to get the details of user. So these all are the classes that we have in Spring Security framework. Okay. So one of the interesting thing here is we can customize each and every component itself. We can customize the security context, we can give our implementation, we can customize the password encoder, we can give our implementation, we can customize user detail service, we can give our custom implementation, a way to fetch the user detail, whether it is from the DB, whether it is from LDAP system, whether it is from third party services, and anything else. Okay, so that is the beauty of the Spring Security framework. It is highly customizable framework that we can customize at any particular point of time to any component itself. Okay, so now we are done with our Spring Security architecture. This is not the complete one, yeah, because we still left with authorization framework. Now, if I explain this one authorization framework, it will be overwhelming for you to understand. So now let's focus on to the authentication mechanism itself, and then in later point of time we're gonna visit this authorization mechanism also. Okay, so now what we're gonna do in the later few videos, we're gonna customize each and every component. We're gonna learn how we can customize each and every component, okay, based on our use case. Okay, so what we're gonna do, either we're gonna implement all the implementation in a custom way, or we can go with hybrid solution, whether some of the implementation is done by Spring Security itself, and some of the implementation is overwritten by us based on our requirement. Okay, so now let's move to the last agenda of our today's video, that is customizing the defaults. Okay, so what we're gonna basically learn about how we can customize user detail service, how we're gonna customize password encoders. From here, from the below one, we will start, and then we will move eventually to the top. So we're gonna follow this down to top approach. Okay, so let's move to our code, and yeah. So right now, what is happening? Okay, so if you think on the perspective of this one, we didn't write a user detail service. So how this user information is coming into picture? From where we are getting it? How this password is getting matched with the stored information? We didn't customize anything yet. So all these are written by default. Okay. So how are we going to customize it? So for the customization, what we can do, we can create one configuration package. This is one best structure to follow. Okay. So what we're going to do, we're going to have all the project configuration at one place. So basically, we're going to annotate it with this one with configuration. Now what we're going to do, we're going to first have this one custom implementation of this user detail service. So what we're going to do, we're going to create one bean, and we're going to just use the details. There is already one in this one. So there is already one interface, that is user detail service. It has bunch of methods and all. Okay. So sorry, there is only one method, that is load user by username. This is so behind the scene, there is already one default implementation is done by Spring Security, which is using this load user by username method to load the user. with the help of username itself. Okay, so right now we are customizing it. So what we're gonna do, user details service, what we are saying, turn new in memory. So this one in memory user detail manager. This is one of the implementation that is already there in Spring Security. So right now we are not actually writing our own code that we will do in later in videos, but this is one of the implementation that is already done over this interface. Okay, user detail service. This one user detail service object itself to the Spring Security framework. Now let's see how it will behave. Okay, so if you see our Spring Security application is started. Now let's move ahead and just hit the API. Boom. What happened? We are getting unauthorized. Why? We given the user, we given the password, but it's still unauthorized. So what happened here? So if you see earlier, we used to get one password and all. Earlier, we used to get one message that is saying we are auto configuring user detail service. But right now, it is not happening. Why? It is not happening because we given our custom implementation of user details manager. So now what is happening? So when a request comes to authentication provider, it is using this one in memory user detail manager that we provide. It passes username to this particular class, ask it to get the details of it. Since it is not having any data as of now, how we're going to add the data of user and password and all, we will come into later point of this video. Okay, so right now it doesn't know what this user means that we are requesting for. It doesn't have any info. It is basically a blank. It is a it is searching in a table which has no data. So basically, this authentication provider asks user detail service, which is our custom implementation, to get the details of the user. But we didn't have any user, so it returned it a null. Since it found null, it throws an error saying, okay, you are not authorized. We don't have any info regarding this user with a name user. So we customized it, but we didn't have any data on it. So what we're gonna do? We're gonna create one user. So basically, what we're gonna do? We're gonna create one user. So how we're gonna create one user? There is one more this one class, which is a builder class called user in Spring Security, with the help of which we can create one user entity itself. So there is one method with a user name. What we're gonna do? We're gonna pass user, and then we're gonna pass password. Let's say we're gonna click 1 2 3 4 5, and then we're gonna have authorities. So this authorities is must. We need to have one authority that I will explain later. Basically, this authority comes into picture when we deal with authorization mechanism, not in the authentication mechanism. So here we are only identifying the user. We are not running any authorization mechanism on the user itself. That will come later in the upcoming videos. So this authority belongs to the authorization mechanism. But still, when we create one user, we need to have one authority that is mandatory. So now we're going to build this. So now our user is built. Now this user needs to be registered with this one. We need to register this user. How are we going to register? We can pass this user. Now our user is registered. Okay. Now let's rerun our application. So yeah. So now we created one user. We registered with our custom implementation of user detail service. Now we try to hit the API with correct password, which is 1 2 3. Let me reconfirm once. 1 2 3 4 and 5. Boom. Again, it is unauthorized. Why? So if you see the architecture, in architecture, we have two things: user detail service and password encoder. So please remember this. Whenever we provide a custom implementation of user detail service, we need to have a custom implementation of password encoder. That is mandatory. This both will go side by side, and this both will go in parallel. So when we have custom implementation of user detail service, we need to have custom implementation of password encoder also. So now how to fix it? What we're going to do, we're going to create one custom implementation of this password encoder. So this is once again custom implementation given by Spring itself. Okay, Spring security itself, we have this custom implementation of no password encoder. Basically, what this means, it means treat password as plain text. Do not use for production ready applications. Ideally, we should encode our passwords, and ideally, we should have this password encoder, which works in a way it compares the encoded password, not the plain text one. Okay. So we should not use this into production ready application. This is only for learning purpose, right? Okay. When we give a custom implementation of user detail service, we need to have a custom implementation of password encoder too. Okay. So now let's run it. So we're gonna save it and run it. So now see, we are able to access our endpoint. Okay. So yeah, so why this goes side by side is because, so let's say you have given a custom implementation of user detail service and you have certain password and all. So this is a plain text password that we store at DB, or let's say in memory, and we didn't give this one. So Spring will use its own version of password encoder. So basically, that means we are assuming that Spring Security should treat our password as a plain text and compare with the password encoder it has. But ideally, behind the scene, what it did, it is having some password encoder which encoded our requested password. So it encoded 1235 into some string, and then it is trying to compare with the requested password, that is 12345. So obviously that won't match. So plain password won't match the encoded password. So it is obvious, no? So that's why it's when we give a custom implementation in user detail service, we should also give the custom implementation of the password encoder, because we best know that, okay, while saving our user into the database or in memory or wherever it is, which encoding mechanism we used. Okay. So the same encoding mechanism we should use into this bin also, so that it can encode the requested password also into the via the same encoding mechanism and compare it. Okay, so that's why it goes side by side or parallel, and it is mandatory to have both. Okay, yeah. So that's it with today's video. So what we learned how to create our first Spring Security project, what to expect by default, then the Spring Security architecture, which is again a very, very important architecture that we need to keep in mind. So basically, and then what we did a custom implementation, not actually the custom implementation. One of the custom implementation is already provided, and we used it. So in later videos, we will do actual custom implementation of user detail service and password encoder. So user details are why we need to do a custom implementation, because in the production ready application, the data source from where we are getting the user depends on various factors. We can either get it from LDAP, we can either get it from DP or S3 or somewhere else, or third party service itself. So that's why in this Spring Security framework given so much customizable components, so that we based on our requirement we can customize each and every component itself. So let's consider it as a stages. So so authentication filter is one stage, then manager, then provider, then user detail service, password encoder, and bunch of other things. We can plug out any of the stage and plug in our version of it. Okay, and it will work magically. That is the power of this Spring Security framework. That is why it is so popular, and that is why we need to dig deep into it, dig deep into its architecture and understand it. So yeah, that's it. So please do comment if you have any doubt. Please like it, subscribe it, and share with your co-workers, colleagues, your batchmates, your friends, and all whoever is trying to learn the Spring Security in an easy way possible. Okay. Okay. See you around in the next video. Till then, bye bye. Take care.